What's up, everybody? I'm Flash. This is One Man's Opinion, the show where we cover just about everything, and today we're talking about Evil Dead Rise. Evil Dead Rise, the next installment of the Evil Dead franchise and the first film that we've gotten since the 2013 version. And look, I've got a lot of thoughts on this film. It's going to be tough to dodge spoilers in this conversation, which the movie is still in theaters, so I feel like I should stay away from spoilers. But this movie, I had a lot of mixed emotions about it by the end of it, and we're just going to dive right into it. Number one, I mean, from the very beginning of the film, you open up, and again, I'm going to stay away from spoilers, but you open up on a girl who is infected. Basically, her and a friend or two, it looks more like they're on this like lakeside vacation. The movie opens up where the movie ends. It's one of those movies. Look, number one, I've never been a fan of movies that start with the ending. You know how a movie will be like, it'll open up and it'll show a scene, and then it'll be like 1 day earlier, 1 week earlier, and then the whole movie is just building up to that scene. I've never liked that because you give away the ending of the movie. Now, this movie did try to turn that on its head a little bit, and again, normally I would say that's a good thing, but the way they did it, I didn't feel like they executed that well either, and that's the difficult part of staying away from the spoilers. But outside of it showing the ending of the movie in the very beginning, outside of that classic trope that I've never been a fan of in almost any context, the opening also didn't make sense because it took place during daylight, and you're not supposed to have deadites during daylight. Yeah, that's never been a thing. That bothered me, and you can say, well, it is a reboot. Maybe the rules are different for these kind of soft reboots that we're getting. Well, yeah, you could argue that. Only later in the movie, the deadites are saying dead by dawn, dead by dawn. You know, call back to the first couple of movies.
Dead by dawn. Dead by dawn. Dead by dawn. Dead by dawn.
And so if that were the case, why do the deadites care if they kill you by dawn? If the sun has no effect on the deadites, then they shouldn't be saying dead by dawn.
Everybody here dies by dawn, Dad.
Dead by dawn. Dead by dawn. Dead by dawn.
During the movie, because who cares if you're dead by dawn, if you're dead today, tomorrow, it doesn't matter. It would be an unstoppable force like a zombie apocalypse. It doesn't matter anymore because they're going to get you. Dead by dawn wouldn't mean anything. In the original movies, the reason it meant something is because the sunlight would cure everything. Like Ash became infected right before dawn. At the end of the first one and going into the second movie, he's actually a deadite, and the dawn cures him of his possession. It also causes everything to kind of creep back inside until the nightfall comes again. And so that was like a huge confusing thing for me because they opened up and they broke one of the very few rules. I mean, to be fair, this franchise has almost no rules, but they broke one like initially, just right out the gate, that had me and my fiance and my friends scratching our heads. And then you get into the meat and potatoes of the film, and I just think the story is kind of bland, and I think there were some weird choices made. I don't think it was all bad, though. It was a mixed bag. There were moments that were obviously callbacks to the other movies, and I'll give you a good example. One of the deadites gets their eye knocked out, boop, and it flies across the room and it goes in somebody's mouth, which is an obvious callback from, I think it's the second movie that happens in. It could be the first. There are a lot of those moments. Like, there are even moments that call back to the 2013 film. At the end of the movie, one of the survivors, not to give anything away, but one of the survivors is standing just covered in blood, and they've got the chainsaw in their hand, and the scene is very reminiscent of how our lead character from 2013 survived and looked toward the end of the film. So, like, there are great callbacks to all the movies, honestly, except maybe Army of Darkness. There's not a whole lot that you could pull away and say there's some stuff in there you could say, okay, that may have been sort of a nod to Army of Darkness, but there are a lot of obvious callbacks to a lot of the other movies. And I, for one, am fine with that. I'm fine with that because it is a reboot, and you want to not only bring in your new audience, but you also want to, slight tip of the cap to the old audience and say, hey, here's this. There were also references that were a little more subtle, like the tree scene that we're all very familiar with in Evil Dead, where you get something that is not a tree at all, but a scene that does have some similarities. It's not quite as invasive as the tree scene, if you'll catch my drift, but it does reminisce. It does bring up those thoughts, those you remember, okay, this is kind of like the tree scene with some of the things that are happening, the way that the person is restrained and held aloft, and so, like, yeah, you get a lot of those callbacks, and there's some great moments like that, but outside of those moments and those callbacks, the story is bland. It often doesn't make sense, and I don't blame them for taking a shot. Like, it takes place in an apartment building, and some of my friends had a real problem with that, saying that's a bad location for this type of horror movie. And, like, yeah, after having seen it, I would have to agree. But I think the idea was there. Like, I don't think it was a bad idea to put it in an apartment building. They had good reasons for how everyone would come to be stuck there. And so that's what you need. You need them to either A, be isolated somewhere, or B, to be stuck somewhere unable to leave. That way the kind of, the Deadites can have their day in the sun, no pun intended. And they tried to pull that off well, and they pulled it off okay. But I think at the end of the day, the apartment building just isn't as scary. Like, it doesn't have the same grab, that isolation, that haunting kind of feeling. It feels like you're in an apartment building. And apartment buildings are not generally very creepy places. I think it did take something from the atmosphere of the film away, having them in the apartment building instead of in the woods or in a cabin. There are other story beats that don't make a whole lot of sense. For example, I was very curious as to how this family in particular would come by the Book of the Dead, because, to get Deadites, somebody's got to read from that thing. And I don't think it's spoilers to say that the book is just under their building. The apartment building apparently used to be like a bank or something. It had like a vault, and under the building they were keeping it there. The whole thing is kind of like, why would they put it, like, you hear a priest on a recording at one point say it needs to be locked away in a vault somewhere. Sure, that's fine. But based on everything that happens in that recording, there's no logical jump from how it got into the priest's hands to how it got into this vault in LA or somewhere in California, wherever they are. And so, like, it's just weird. It's just like, oh, okay, so this thing was just under this building for like a really long time, and now thanks to an earthquake, somebody has access to it. It's very convenient. It's very convenient if you're wanting to tell this story. And I also had a problem with the Deadites a little bit. Look, they were just kind of bland. Like, they were all the Deadites you saw were just like white eyes, goofy teeth, sunken face. I mean, they looked like they had been on hardcore drugs for a while. Like, that's what they looked like, but with white eyes. That's how your Deadites look in this movie. This movie did not have the edge that 2013 had. And so, like, if you're a fan of the OGs, you're not going to have Ash Williams in this one. His charisma is missed. Bruce Campbell's charisma is very much missed in the film. There are a couple of actors that do a pretty decent job in this movie, but also I find it weird that we're casting kids. This does not seem like the type of movie where you should be involving children. And, like, it's not just because it's like, a very adult-themed kind of horror movie, with lots of gore. It just feels weird having children run around in this kind of movie, because it's not fun to watch children in this circumstance, and at some point it takes you out of the movie because you're just like, do we have to watch these kids die? Like, these are kids. And somebody may say, man, for a long time, slasher movies were chopping up 16, 17, 18-year-olds. Yeah, but go back and look at those movies. Those people were either A, played by 25, 26-year-olds a lot of the time, or B, at least looked much older. They were counselors they weren't campers. 9 times out of 10, they were counselors at a camp. They were sometimes seniors in high school, but they were played by much older people, like Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween, who was playing a senior in high school, but was much older. And so, like, it's weird to see, like, actual children playing actual children in this kind of super over-the-top, gory sort of horror movie. And so one of two things had to happen. Either you had to pull your punches with some of the kills when it came to the kids, or the kids couldn't die. Like you had to dial some certain things back, and it felt like that happened. It lacked an edge that 2013 had, and it lacked charisma that the original two had. And look, go back and watch the original two right now if you want to. And yeah, the effects are dated now, but they're still like good horror movies. There's still something you can sit down, watch, and talk about, and be like, what you can even like discuss what is happening in those movies and have different ideas from someone watching it right next to you. This movie doesn't have that. It's black and white what happens, and the only parts that you have to kind of discuss is why did they make that decision, because it was weird and it didn't really work. And those are not the kind of discussions you want to have watching a movie. But yeah, the Deadites didn't look good. Even, some of the more brutal parts of the movie were not great. Of course, when it came to the Deadites being killed at times, those moments were graphic and kind of maybe what you were looking for in an Evil Dead movie. To me, it just really lacked that edge. And I thought that there was potential to have more happen with the Deadite. For example, there was this running theme throughout the movie where the Book of the Dead would flip to a certain page where it depicted something happening, and then that would happen to another person. And that happened pretty consistently all up until one particular character became infected. And I'll go ahead and tell you this because I'm not spoiling anything. The picture depicted almost like tentacles coming out of their mouth, something akin to The Last of Us. How it had, it had those the tendrils, that come out of the mouth from the fungus. And I thought we were going to get to see something like that, and I was super stoked because it looked awesome in the drawing, and I thought, okay, this is a really good time for these effects to shine, and we can have something that's really just, bothersome in this film. And it never happened. The person who was infected when that picture was shown never had that kind of moment. And I was so disappointed. That infected Deadite just became another that looked just like all the other infected Deadites. There was nothing different there. There was nothing different about them. And look, you don't have to have anything different, but if your Deadites are all going to look pretty much the same, then you better make sure that it's an interesting look. And to me, it just wasn't very interesting. Unfortunately, the more I thought, when I walked out of the theater, I thought it was okay. I thought, it was an all right attempt to reboot the Evil Dead franchise. I think they could learn some things and move on and do better the next time. And I still think that they could do that. I certainly do. But I do not see this getting a sequel. Well, I take that back. The way Hollywood is, this will almost definitely get a sequel. But it's not... I hope they do much better with the next one. Let me just put it that way, because this is not very good, and I don't think the characters are going to be really great to build off of. I couldn't understand for a long time why we never got a 2013 sequel. That movie was very good. It had the little cameo from Bruce Campbell at the very end, and nothing ever really came of it. We got the series after that, which I enjoyed, but then that ended abruptly, and now here we are with this, and I think this is the worst step the franchise has ever taken, unfortunately. And I don't say that lightly. I've quite liked this franchise for a very long time. I think it's one of the horror staples. I mean, honestly, it's one of the most important horror movie franchises that there is. And, Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi are horror icons for what they've done with the originals, and then Army of Darkness, and then moving on into the series. And I think 2013 was a really, really good reboot. But this one it missed on so many levels for me. Some things it did right. Like I said, the nods, the winking a nod to the camera, the tip of the hats to some of the originals were really good, but those were definitely the best parts of the movie. And if the best parts of your movie are just kind of ripped off from the predecessor, what do you have left at the end of it? And I think that's my final thoughts on the movie. If the best things from your movie came from another movie, then you've missed the mark somewhere. It's okay to put those things in there, but you also need to land your own identity. You need to, if you're going to reboot this franchise, you need a charismatic character that everyone's rooting for. You need moments, shock and awe moments that are like, wow, did you see that? I'm never going to forget that, because all the Evil Dead movies had that. All the Evil Dead movies, whether you liked Army of Darkness or not, whether you liked them all or not, there are moments in every one of those movies that you're like, I'm never going to forget that. This movie doesn't have them. The most unforgettable moments in this movie are moments from the other movies. And I think that that's the worst part about it. I'm going to give my rating for Evil Dead Rise, and I'm giving Evil Dead Rise a 68 out of 100. All right. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Let me know what you thought about Evil Dead Rise. Am I being too hard on it? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially if you think that I was a little off on this one, or if you think that I'm right, back me up in the comments a little bit. I'd love to hear those thoughts and those reactions. I always love having those conversations with you down in the comments. I appreciate you stopping by, and if you thought I was wrong, don't get mad. Remember, it's just one man's opinion. Thanks.